He's just built differently, and some people are. He is very clearly a man of enormous vitality. I mean, where other men would wilt and would kind of fall apart on a diet of McDonald's fillet of fish and Diet Coke, he thrives. I mean, and actually, I think it would be a bad idea for Donald Trump to change his... I mean, I don't think he will change his diet, but in a funny way, I think it would be detrimental for Donald Trump to change his routine. It's got him this far.
Does America face a health crisis?
Yes, America really does face a health crisis of unprecedented proportions. Americans have never been as sick as they are today. In fact, there were new figures released recently that showed that 75% of Americans now are either overweight or obese, and the figures are projected only to increase. I think by 2050 they reckon that 80% of adults will be obese and 60% of adolescents and young people. So just in terms of obesity alone, Americans are fatter than they've ever been, but they're also unhealthier in all sorts of other ways. Virtually every chronic disease you can think of, everything from diabetes to Alzheimer's to behavioural conditions like autism, are on the increase. And so yes, I mean, America very definitely does have a health crisis.
And what should RFK Jr. do to try and tackle this crisis?
Well, I think it's a problem that needs to be attacked actually from multiple angles, and I think RFK knows this too. I mean, I've followed RFK for some time. He's been active. He's been an environmentalist for decades. He's been campaigning for health for decades. So he knows the ins and outs of the American food system. He knows the ins and outs of agribusiness in the US, of pharmaceutical licensing. And he's going to have to address all of those things and more. I mean, one of the main things that he's talked about is changing the system of food additive regulation. So processed food is a big part of the problem of chronic ill health in the US. You know, Americans and people throughout the developing world and the developed world rather, and the developing world are consuming greater and greater quantities of processed food produced in factories by corporations, wrapped in plastic, sold from supermarket shelves and convenience store shelves. And processed food is riddled with all sorts of additives that are being shown to be extremely harmful to human health. The system of additive licensing in the US isn't is absolutely not up to standard. It's very different from the system of food additive licensing in the EU, for example. So I think in the EU something like 2,000 additives are licensed for use in food. In the US, by contrast, where you have this system called generally recognized as safe, which is presided over by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, nobody actually knows the full number of additives in the food supply. They reckon it might be something like 10,000, but the generally recognized as safe system actually allows corporations that produce food additives to introduce them into the food supply without any kind of independent testing. So if you're a corporation, you can create a new food producer, you can create a new food additive, you can say that it's safe, you can say that you have tested it and that it's safe, and then you can add it to the food supply, you can add it to your products, and the FDA is fine with that. And RFK Jr. has talked at length about altering the system of food additive regulation, changing it. He's talked about the revolving door culture as well. There's a big revolving door culture between the regulators and the industries that they regulate. So people who work for the FDA, let's say they approve a vaccine. Well, 6 months after they've approved a vaccine, they go and work for the company that makes the vaccine they've just approved. There's no real independence in the regulatory system either, and so that's something else that he's going to address. But I mean, it's something that needs to be tackled across the board. The problem is not just regulatory. It's about education. It's even about access to nutritious foods. You know, you often hear talk of things like things called food deserts, where people live in urban impoverished areas and they don't actually have access within their immediate locality to any kind of decent food at all. And so I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach. It will have to be, and I mean, I'm certain that it's not going to take 4 years. It's going to take much longer than 4 years. This is going to have to be a multi-term program that RFK introduces. It will be multiple administrations. It will be decades, because it's a problem that's developed over decades as well. That's an important thing to remember. You know, it's taken 50, 70 years for Americans to get this unhealthy. It's not going to take 4 years to make them healthy again. Far from it.
It's not just Americans though, is it? It's in Britain as well, and particularly places like Scotland. But when I moved to the States, it was interesting going to some of the supermarkets, the local supermarkets, and everything's processed in a way that in Britain you could go to like a Tesco Express or a mini Sainsbury's, and at least there'll be fruit and vegetables. You know, you'd have the option to have healthier foods. But here it just seems like the options are just so much more limited. Like if you go to a CVS or if you go to a 7-Eleven, which are basically their kind of staple stores everywhere, there's just no fresh food at all. It's just like everything's processed. Can you talk about seed oils as well? What are seed oils? Why is RFK Jr. obsessed with seed oils? And what should people be using to make their food?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's an interesting observation that you make about the lack of available healthy foods. I mean, I came to America for the first time in about 2006, 2007. I went to Los Angeles, and I can remember going to a convenience store, actually a supermarket. I think it might even have been a Ralph's or something. And I thought, I'll get some wholemeal bread. I'll get some healthy bread to have for toast. And I bought this bread, and it was like brioche. It was the equivalent of brioche. It was marketed as healthy wholemeal bread, but it had so much sugar in it. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was totally immediately noticeable to my sophisticated European palate that actually, there was a lot of sugar in the bread. But seed oils, seed oils have been a big focus for RFK Jr. There's been a really big sort of health campaign about seed oils for some time, especially on Twitter, in the kind of corners of Twitter that I occupy, and also more broadly now, it's kind of spread out into the wider kind of wellness and health space. So seed oils are, it's exactly what the name tells you. They're oils that are produced from seeds. So they're produced from things like sunflower seeds, produced from nuts, and also vegetable oils actually as well. I mean, so we generally say seed oils, but actually vegetable oils are basically the same. Produced from corn, soy, etc. And what's bad about them? Well, we've never eaten seed and vegetable oils in any great quantity. So they're innovations. They have only really existed for the last century, when we developed complicated industrial extraction processes that allowed us actually to produce them. I mean, people have eaten seed oils, yes, in small quantities for a long time, because people have eaten seeds. Seeds have been a staple human food for a long time, for hundreds of thousands of years. If you look at Paleolithic sites, as an archaeologist, evidence of diet, you'll see people eat nuts and seeds. Yes, they do. But we're consuming seed oils now in enormous quantities, and they differ fundamentally from animal fats. And how they differ, well, that's the problem. I mean, I won't get too deep into the science of it, other than I'll say that seed oils basically they're reactive in a way that animal fats aren't. So we refer to animal fats generally as saturated fats, and that is in reference to their hydrogen content. And animal fats, the fats are saturated with hydrogen. They're not in the case of seed and vegetable oils, and what that means is that the oils are very reactive. They react within the body. They form harmful free radicals, which damage tissues. There are all sorts of studies that have linked consumption of seed oils to various kind of inflammatory diseases, cancers, autoimmune diseases, basically the whole gamut of chronic diseases that have exploded over the last 50 to 70 years. At exactly the same time as consumption of these seed and vegetable oils has increased. So we've been told for the last 70 years, you shouldn't consume animal fats. Because you shouldn't consume cholesterol. So we shouldn't eat butter, you shouldn't eat red meat, you shouldn't eat eggs, shouldn't consume dairy products, cheese, milk, etc. And so we've replaced, in a way that never happened in human history, we've replaced animal foods with these novel, basically industrial foodstuffs. And the mounting evidence suggests that's really been a disaster for our health. So I think that RFK Jr. is right to target seed oils. They're definitely one identifiable ingredient in the food supply that's changed, that is likely to be responsible for a good portion of chronic disease. But they're not the only problem, I think, with processed food. They're not the only thing that is making people so unhealthy, and you get a certain amount of fixation on seed oils actually within the health sphere. So you have people saying, oh, if we ban seed oils, then Americans will be healthy again. Everything will be fine. And I think banning seed oils or replacing seed oils, encouraging people not to consume seed oils but to consume animal fats, the kind of fats that our ancestors have eaten for the longest period of time, for hundreds of thousands of years, that would be good. That would absolutely be good. But there are other problems too, I think. So we shouldn't just fixate on seed oils.
Just very briefly, interestingly, on the seed oils problem, is it the case that so many farms rely on growing these seeds that the lobby will be so powerful that it will be impossible to actually ban these seed oils? Surely, because there's so many jobs that rely on growing rapeseed and sunflower seeds and whatever.
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt that RFK is going up against enormous vested interests, huge vested interests, pharmaceutical interests, of course, and also agricultural interests. And so yes, already he's encountering significant opposition to his appointment, to his confirmation, because he's been nominated but he hasn't been confirmed, and so he has to go through a whole confirmation process in order to be properly appointed as head of Health and Human Services. And it is pharma and agribusiness that are kind of leading the pushback against him, because they have huge amounts of money and they have huge lobbies. Big red states, places like Iowa, wherever, they have, they're represented by people who are basically enthralled to these interests. So the food system needs to change. The subsidy system needs to change. So there's been a long-standing system of subsidies that basically incentivizes the massive overproduction of corn and soy, which are the two primary cheap ingredients that go into processed food, is corn and soy. So corn provides the carbohydrates, the sugars, and also some of the fats, and soy provides the protein and the fats as well. And both of these commodities are produced in enormous quantities, and they're worth enormous amounts of money to big agricultural concerns. They're not worth so much money to the ordinary farmers themselves. Like in the UK, American farmers struggle. Normal farmers struggle. It's not easy being a farmer in the US, even if you have an enormous farm that yields, huge quantities of corn or soy. The profits are going to big business. They're not going to you. So, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the task that is facing RFK Jr. In the same way that another one of Trump's appointments, Pete Hegseth, who has been appointed to lead the DoD, he's facing huge pushback again from the military industrial complex, precisely because he's targeting these vested interests. He's saying, look, this system doesn't work and it needs to change. And so I think any of Trump's appointments who say that, who really mean that and really are going to try and change the system, are going to face significant difficulties in doing so. Which isn't to say that they won't be able to do it, but it is to say that they're going to have a much harder time than a safe, corporate-friendly appointee would have.
Slightly glib question, but Donald Trump himself isn't exactly the healthiest of people. He is known to be obsessed with eating McDonald's, Diet Coke and so on. What do you make of his diet, and how has he got so much energy and vitality? You watch him on the campaign and he just seems to have endless amounts of energy, and yet seemingly his diet is so poor.
Yeah, I honestly, I think the only real answer to this question is that he's just built differently, and some people are. He is very clearly a man of enormous vitality. It's genetic. It's who he is. And so yes, I mean, where other men would wilt and would kind of fall apart on a diet of McDonald's fillet of fish and Diet Coke, he thrives. I mean, and actually, I think it would be a bad idea for Donald Trump to change his. I mean, I don't think he will change his diet, but people want him to change his diet because he's in his 70s and they want him to be healthy, and they want him to continue to live as long as possible and to lead as long as possible. But actually, in a funny way, I think it would be detrimental for Donald Trump to change his routine. It's got him this far. It's allowed him to campaign politically and actually to look. He almost looks better with each passing year. It's quite strange to look at Donald Trump and compare him to his political opponents, to compare him to the obvious, appalling decline of someone like Joe Biden, but also even the decline of someone like Barack Obama. I mean, Barack Obama really does look now like a shell of his former self for various different reasons. But I just think it's who Donald Trump is. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't recommend his diet to anybody, and yet somehow he just does seem to thrive on it. It just seems to. He's found that it works, and so he's just stuck with it. He likes it, and it's good enough.
Well, Kamala Harris also looks rather haggard after her election defeat. The thing is, we're not just talking about people getting fatter, obesity rates, obviously that's a huge issue, chronic illnesses, particularly among children, which is, again, something RFK, is very vocal about, but also something that you talk about is the decline of testosterone in men. Why is testosterone declining? Can you talk about how significant that is statistically? And what's the impact of that?
Yeah, well, testosterone is declining precipitously, and this is well established. This isn't. I wouldn't say that this is controversial within the scientific community, although discussing the political implications of it is still fairly controversial. So there was a study done from the late 1980s till the early 2000s called the Massachusetts Male Aging Study. And researchers took a random sample of men of various different ages from the general population living around Boston, and they measured various different biomarkers. They did blood tests, etc. And one of the biomarkers that they measured over that period of about 20 odd years was testosterone. And when the results came to be analysed, the testosterone data came to be analysed in about 2005, 2007. It turned out that average testosterone levels among the subjects in the study had declined year on year by about 1%. So 1% every year. So 20% over the course of the study. And that was a big shock. That was a big shock at the time, and people really were quite taken aback by that. And so other research teams around the world tried to look into whether these population level declines were happening in their countries. So you had a group of Finnish scientists did it, and they thought, because Finnish men generally score higher on various indices of reproductive health than American men do, so Finnish men generally have higher sperm count and sperm quality, fewer instances of undescended testicles, a lower incidence of testicular cancer and things like that. These Finnish researchers thought, no, that we won't see this testosterone decline among Finnish men. Well, guess what? They did. It was just as bad. And in fact, actually, I think it might even have been worse. And then in other countries, Israel, other countries around the world, the decline has been mirrored. So there appears to be a kind of uniform decline of about 1% each year among men in the developed world, and indeed in the developing world, as more studies are coming out of testosterone levels over there. So there's a population collapse, really, in terms of testosterone levels. Why is that important? Well, it's important in one immediate sense because it's part actually of a broader collapse in reproductive health for men and for women. Women are experiencing similarly grave reproductive issues, but I mean the testosterone decline for men is part and parcel also with a precipitous decline in sperm counts. So there was a book that was published a couple of years ago by a reproductive health expert, Professor Shanna Swan of Mount Sinai University in New York, and she, on the basis of trends in sperm counts, she extrapolated that by 2050 or by 2045, the median man in the Western world would have a sperm count of 0. And what that means basically is that half of all men would produce no sperm whatsoever, and the other half would produce so few that they might as well produce none. And what that means basically is that, you know, within a quarter century, we might actually be facing a situation where men, where the human race, can't reproduce by natural means. That's simply on the basis of the data, of the observable data, of extrapolating from the observable data. So testosterone decline is part and parcel of this big reproductive health decline. And I think, and Professor Shanna Swan thinks, and other people think, that it's linked to, for example, exposure to harmful chemicals, to a class of chemicals called endocrine disrupting chemicals, which alter the body's hormonal system. They upset the ratio of testosterone to estrogen in men and women, and that has disastrous effects because the body's hormonal balance is essential to sexual differentiation, sexual development, maturation. If you interfere with the testosterone to estrogen ratio of a fetus rather, then basically you can alter its sexual development for life. You can have lifelong effects on a fetus if you expose it to these harmful chemicals, and that seems to be what's happening, among other things. But also people are being exposed to these harmful chemicals actually on a daily basis throughout their entire lives, through the food, through the water, they're in the air, they're in personal care products and soaps, deodorants, perfumes, etc. They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. So we're kind of being bathed in these chemicals in a way that really wasn't happening before they were invented. These are novel chemicals that came about as part of the industrial age. You know, they've been around for less than 100 years, maybe 50, maybe less than that even. So there's these toxic exposures are a big part of it, and it's creating a kind of broader reproductive health decline. You've also got the bad food, the processed food, obesity, chronic ill health in general, diabetes, things like that. But then this testosterone decline also has political implications, I think, and this is something that I talk about. Have talked about a lot. I was in a Tucker Carlson documentary called The End of Men, which aired in, I think it was October 2022, and generated absolute hysteria for about 2 weeks from the mainstream media. The documentary, I was in it with RFK Jr. and with some of my fellow right-wing bodybuilders from Twitter, and it focused on male reproductive health issues and testosterone decline, the scale of the problem, and some the causes and some of the solutions as well. But it was greeted with hysteria. I mean, it was greeted as a kind of barely disguised sort of fascist fever dream. Really, that's the way that it was treated in the mainstream media, because we talked about the political implications of the fact that actually more and more men are not men anymore. That's basically what it comes down to with testosterone decline. Testosterone is the master male hormone. It is necessary for sexual differentiation of boys from girls and men from women. And if you have a testosterone decline, especially on the scale of the population-wise decline in a population-wide decline in testosterone, then you're going to see, I think, effects, political effects, social effects on the aggregate level. You're going to have a society of men without chests, basically, and that's a phrase that C.S. Lewis coined in the 1940s to describe to describe the kind of deleterious effects of an inadequate moral education for men. Well, actually, he was talking metaphorically when he said, that men aren't being educated properly to be men. Now we've reached a stage where actually, biologically, it might be impossible, or it's becoming certainly more and more difficult for men to be men, because they are exposed to these toxic chemicals, because they live they live lifestyles that are incredibly unhealthy. So I think that testosterone decline is a big issue. It's going to become a big issue, and we've already seen on the American political scene. We've seen a lot of talk about testosterone actually as a dividing political issue within the last few months during the election campaign. So, on the one hand, you had the Republicans with the RNC. You have Hulk Hogan going up on stage and ripping his shirt open, and in his classic kind of kayfabe style, to reveal a Trump Vance t-shirt, this sort of testosterone-fueled extravaganza, just really absurd, like something from an 80s action film. And then by contrast, at the Democrat National Convention, you had a Planned Parenthood vasectomy bus parked outside the conference center. I think actually not enough people know about this. So Planned Parenthood drove a mobile clinic to the Democrat National Convention, parked it outside, and offered free vasectomies to any men who wanted a vasectomy. They also offered early stage abortions as well for women. And then in the convention center, you had people, politicians and also commentators, talking about how actually testosterone decline is a good thing. So Dana Bash from CNN, for example, said that, Republican men are different from Democrat men. Democrat men, it's okay to be low testosterone. And why is it okay? Because actually low testosterone men will be more likely to vote for a woman as president. Testosterone decline is a good thing because it makes men more progressive. It makes men more inclined to be led by a woman, indeed a woman of color. So testosterone has actually become a kind of dividing line in American politics in a way that it wasn't even 2 years ago. When I was in this End of Men documentary, and really all the liberal mainstream media wanted to do was to pretend that it was just like a bizarre kind of fantasy of sort of repressed homosexuality. So testosterone is becoming a big issue, and I think that you will find actually that the Republicans certainly are going to run with a kind of testosterone politics. J.D. Vance, he's vice president elect. He follows me on Twitter and other similar accounts. The Republican leadership seems to be pretty plugged in actually to what we're doing, and there was a Daily Telegraph piece a few weeks ago, about why Donald Trump is so loved by wrestlers. And in that piece, it also actually, there are a couple of paragraphs about me and about another figure called Bronze Age Pervert, and how we had basically created like an army of bodybuilders to vote for Trump, which is absolute. It's hilarious. It's hilarious, and to an outsider, it might sound absurd, but it's actually very serious. I do think that testosterone decline, that masculine decline, is an issue that needs to be contended with. It's having real political effects, and I'm glad actually that the Republicans have grabbed the nettle by the stalk, and they're actually kind of introducing this as a real political issue.
I've got so many questions, but just very, very briefly on this topic, so we can move on to other things. But I know that you talked about the Republicans taking over the kind of masculine energy through this testosterone drive, the convention, and so on. And Trump won young men by a huge margin, and there was a big shift, particularly among young men, to Donald Trump. In Britain, I think it's fascinating that the Conservative Party, obviously the political situation is completely different, but the Conservative Party is doing very, very badly among young people, among young men. There are some polls that suggest reform is doing a bit better with young men, but it's not on the same level as what's going on in the States. And there are, again, there's some suggestions that young men in Britain actually would support Donald Trump. I think there was one poll that said or suggested that around half of young men in Britain support Donald Trump. but that support wasn't then sort of shared with the Conservative Party in the British political situation. And something that I just have thought about over the last few days, thinking about why this is, why are the Conservatives in Britain so rubbish at connecting with young men, and to a certain extent reform as well. And do you agree it's because they lack that kind of masculine energy that, you know, Kemi Badenoch has been described as mummy by some commentators on the right, and, you know, the Conservative Party just doesn't share that same kind of energy that Trump and the kind of MAGA Republicans do in the States?
I think it's worth remembering that you know, the Republican Party wasn't always like this. I mean, of course, the Republican Party has always appealed to gun owners, to, you know, to rural people, to white collar, to blue collar workers, and all that kind of stuff. But actually, Donald Trump has led a successful coup, basically, within the Republican Party. You know, he has remade over the last 8 years. He's remade the Republican Party in his own image, and in his own very personal, you know, the image of his kind of personal brand, which is obviously very distinctive. And so I do think that the Conservatives, yes, I mean, they need a total overhaul. I mean, they had an overhaul under David Cameron when David Cameron, you know, came on the scene and was doing all of his hug a hoodie stuff, and he travelled to the Arctic and he was talking about sort of compassionate conservatism and the big society and all that sort of absolute drivel. But yeah, it's very clear, I think, to me, that the Conservatives are still a really low energy party. Low energy, really low energy. You know, you think of a conservative man, you think of someone who is, you think of if you think of a young conservative man, you're going to think of a young fuddy-duddy. You're going to think of a young man in pink trousers, maybe with an ill-fitting kind of tweed blazer, and you know, who's trying to kind of ape the mores of the kind of the landed gentry, and it's all kind of low energy. It's all kind of a bit of a parody. It's all a bit sort of laughable. And I mean, I certainly remember, you know, when I was at Oxford, then the young Conservatives were people really you didn't want to hang around with. It was almost as if they had, you know, they really smelled really bad, you know, and you just wanted to keep them at arm's length. So I think that, yes, I mean, I think that there needs to be, it's obvious from the Trumpian example, and also from the example of other parties, of other right-wing parties within the Western world, the AfD in Germany, for example, National Rally, also in France, that actually conservatism, right-wing politics, they're not just for older people, you know. They can appeal to the young. They can have a mass appeal for young people. And, you know, you can have young people on TikTok singing right-wing slogans, singing, you know, like the Ausländer Raus song that was very popular among the youth of Germany, a kind of pro-AfD anthem, that kind of thing. So, you know, the Conservatives could potentially, or a right-wing party, Reform, I think would probably be a better candidate maybe than the Conservatives. A right-wing party in Britain absolutely can have a popular youth appeal, but they're certainly not going to do it. The Conservatives certainly aren't going to do it if they stick to their old ways. I mean, Nigel Farage did a very good job during the election of using TikTok to his advantage, and he's about as close to a Trump figure as we have in the UK, I think. But even Nigel, I think, has a way to go, and he certainly, I mean, to me, it looks like he lacks some of the self-belief and the confidence that Trump has, for example, and that's been very evident in Nigel Farage's stance on immigration, his flip-flopping from before the election and then after the election. You know, before the election, he said, I think it was to you. Was it to you? I think he said that he said mass deportations or deportations aren't my ambition. I think he said that. I think he said that in an interview with you. And then he did an interview with Winston Marshall after the election, and all of a sudden he was suggesting that actually maybe over 1 million people might need to be deported. And that was simply because Trump had won the election, and demonstrated that actually you can win a landslide political victory on the basis of an explicit policy of mass deportation. So I think that the Conservative Party has a very long way to go, and I also think that with the emergence of reform, it's going to be much more difficult for the Conservatives to appeal to the youth vote because they just look like the establishment.
Why do so many on the left worship fat people?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I think it's a complicated question. I mean, I think it's broadly it's a kind of Leninist thing, really. It's a Leninist thing. So I think that what you've had throughout the 20th century, from the late 19th through the 20th into the 21st centuries, you've had this kind of Leninist kind of liberation movement where the left has established a broader and broader coalition of oppressed peoples, and you know, in the 1960s it was women, and it was homosexuals, and then it was about race, and now it's just moved on to, well, what's another oppressed class of people today? Well, it's fat people. It's fat people are subject to conscious and unconscious bias, and so they need to be included explicitly in the kind of left's program of human liberation. So, I mean, I think it's partly to do with the fact that just fat people are an enormous demographic, right? There are a lot of fat people, and so actually, if you have an explicit leftist political platform that says, we embrace fat people, we don't want you to change, actually people who tell you to change, well, they're oppressors, they're also likely to be racist and classist and misogynist and all these other things as well. So, I mean, I think it's just it's a natural part of leftist politics today, really, because leftism aims to unite, to build coalitions of oppressed peoples. I mean, if we didn't live in a society full of fat people, leftists wouldn't be talking about fat people. It's a function of the fact that we are so fat, but they're definitely a natural. I think they're a natural demographic for leftists, of course, and in many respects they embody the kind of values actually that leftists want to promote, including dependency. Most notably, I mean, it's not really a wonder actually that health and fitness, that working out, has become a right-wing thing, because actually, in order to be healthy today, because basically the norm is to be unhealthy, then actually you have to take personal responsibility for your life. You have to take your life in your own hands. You have to have a vision to be better. And that actually is fundamentally now, I think, a right wing thing, because it fits with the emphasis on personal responsibility, the emphasis on personal virtue, the emphasis on striving and will and achievement. I mean, these are all things that the left now explicitly disowns and disavows. And so, I mean, I just think that fat people are a natural constituency for the left today.
I think there was an interesting question to Jordan Peterson once, where he was asked, what is something that you've changed your mind on? And he said something like fat people, because he now feels more compassionate towards them. He feels that it's actually very difficult to lose weight, and it's not necessarily them just being lazy. There are actually other issues, mental health and so on, depression. And once you are fat, you're kind of more, you might want to eat more because you're depressed about that fact. It's like a vicious cycle. Do you, and maybe this is a woke question, so forgive me, but do you think we should have a bit more compassion towards our fat friends, our fat brothers and sisters? It's actually not just, an issue of just pure laziness. There may be other things going on there.
Oh yeah, listen, I mean, I know, for example, if you only need to consider the example of children whose parents feed them badly. It's actually, children are set up to fail by their parents. They're fed dreadful food, they're plonked down and given an iPad or a computer or a mobile phone. They're not encouraged to exercise. And and so they end up being fat as children, and then they're fat as teenagers, and then they're even fatter as adults. It's a complicated business, and I mean, I certainly have compassion for children who aren't given the right example, who aren't fed properly, who aren't encouraged to exercise and develop their physical capabilities. Absolutely. I mean, at the same time, what you'll get people who say, look, it's impossible to diet and lose weight. And this is actually the argument that's being made by companies like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, companies that are making these new GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs, Ozempic, Mounjaro, etc. You know, they are getting very, very heavily behind fat positivity. They're paying fat positivity influencers. Their advertising basically says, you know, it's not your fault that you're fat. Here, take Ozempic. So there's a lot going on with fat positivity, but I understand that people eat out of people in misery eat more. You know, eating is a pleasure, and for people who have hard lives and don't earn a lot of money, then actually, I mean, just eating some sugary, cheap processed food that's easy to prepare it can be a great pleasure and a comfort. And but I think that there's, well, first of all, we can't deny the laws of thermodynamics. So if you eat too much, you will put on weight. If you don't eat enough, you'll lose weight. That is how it works. That is actually how it works. But nevertheless, it is more complicated than that. You know, these harmful chemicals, for example, that we're exposed to, endocrine disruptors, they have metabolic effects as well. They can alter the body's resting metabolic rate so that you burn fewer calories. You can put on weight, even if you're not eating more. So it's a complicated business. But what I do think is that we absolutely shouldn't lose sight of the fact that people are overeating and that people are eating the wrong things, and they're not exercising, and that the wrong answer to that problem is to hand more power to Big Pharma, is to let Big Pharma make more money from fat people with these new drugs. So Novo Nordisk, the manufacturer of Wegovy Ozempic, is now the largest company in Europe. It's worth something like $500 billion, I think, which is $200 billion more than the entire economy of its native Denmark. And I actually think that if Wegovy Ozempic is really taken up in the coming decade, I actually think that Novo Nordisk may very well be the world's largest company, and that will be simply off the back of fat loss injections. So we should help people. I absolutely believe that we should help people, and I think that we need to be clever about the way that we help people too. I don't think it's not just enough, I think, to send people to boot camp. I mean, I think that works for some people. I don't think it works for others. I think that you need to give people incentives of various different kinds. I think you need to make it easier, for one thing, for people to afford good food or to be able to produce good food. And that's something that I've emphasized in my last book, The Eggs Benedict Option. I talked about household gardening, about people producing their own food in their own gardens, and how good it would be if we could encourage people to grow some of their own food and in their gardens or on communal allotments, etc., and how that's worked in the past in the US, in the UK, and still works today in a country like Russia, where lots of people produce their own food in their own gardens. So I don't think that fat people should just be deprived of food and forced to exercise. I think that encouraging people to eat better and encouraging them to exercise is obviously going to have to be part of the solution, though.
But there does seem to have been, in my view, I mean, you're obviously someone who focuses on this issue a lot, but there does seem to have been a bit of a vibe shift away from the so-called body positive movement in the last few years. You don't see as many, fat people on magazines, fat people being promoted in the same way that you did maybe 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. And there was a real reaction. I remember when I was growing up, I'm obviously younger than you, there was a real I guess it wasn't a moral panic because it was a real issue, but there was a serious panic around anorexia as being, in school that was all we were taught about was anorexia and, listening to some stupid Lily Allen song about being thin and all this stuff. And then that shifted all the way to the other side where it was like, we hate anorexia, but we love fat people. What's going on with the body positive movement? Can do you agree with me there has been a bit of a shift towards healthier people, healthier models, and all this stuff matters, what you're being presented on popular culture and things like that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, look, I mean, you only need to take a look at Lizzo. Lizzo has lost a significant amount of weight, apparently through exercise and changing her diet. I mean, that's, if anybody perhaps can be used as a yardstick for the fortunes of body positivity, it's Lizzo, right? And she's actually decided to lose weight and change her image. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's very definitely a vibe shift. It was rammed down our throats for years. Rammed down our throats. We had fat centerfolds and fat models everywhere and fat Victoria's Secret runway models and all this kind of stuff. And, it went on for years, and I think that people were just being tired. People were just tired of being told, look, being fat is just as healthy. It's not a moral category. Being fat, it has no moral valence whatsoever. You're as beautiful if you're fat as if you're thin. And you have. I mean, you talked about Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has raised this point about self-esteem movements more broadly. It's a betrayal. I think people recognise that it's a betrayal too. So, you tell people, actually, you're perfect the way that you are. There's nothing wrong with you. You're 600 pounds. You're beautiful. You're the best you could possibly be. Please don't change yourself. People know, even a 600-pound person who is in absolute misery, they know that they aren't everything they could be. And so actually, what you're doing is you're really betraying people by you're not offering them a way out. You're not offering them a positive ideal. You're not offering them anything to aspire to other than the misery they already inhabit. And I think that it resonates broadly actually with people. I think people see that. I mean, there's a kind of broader as well. There's obviously a broader disillusionment, I think, with wokery, whatever you want to call it. It's. I mean, fat positivity is sort of part and parcel of a much broader package of nonsense ideas that people have actually grown very tired of, and I mean, that's symbolised perhaps best of all by Donald Trump's victory on November the 5th. We're seeing across the board, we're seeing a vibe shift, I think, on all sorts of issues. So yeah, I mean, I think that you'll still get leftists pushing fat positivity. It will still be a front in the kind of leftist assault on common sense and traditional values, and it is an assault on traditional values, of course. I mean, gluttony is one of the 7 deadly sins. I mean, we are talking about a widespread traditional revulsion against people who are overweight and seriously overweight, and it wasn't the norm. We're sort of led to believe almost like it's always been the norm. Like fat, we've always had this number of fat people. We just haven't sort of paid them enough attention. But actually, that's not the case at all. It's absolutely not the case at all. I mean, there's a very funny meme that was on 4chan about Homer Simpson, of Homer Simpson stepping on the scales. It's from an episode in the 1990s, and Homer Simpson's like, I don't know, 280 pounds or something, 20 stone, right? And the caption is, in 1990, this was considered comically obese. And now, in 2024, like 10-year-olds are 280 pounds. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a definite backlash. There's a definite backlash against it. You can feel it. And certainly, I think, under the influence of Trump in the US, then I think culturally we're going to see a shift as well. As cynically, of course, as film studios, as producers of entertainment, etc., realise, actually, you know what, there isn't the money is actually in traditional portrayals of beauty and traditional portrayals of heroism, etc. So I think that we will see a big shift actually in the coming years.
Now, you obviously are a so-called influencer. You've got a big Twitter account. You've written books. You've been commentating on these issues for a number of years now. And we won't get into your whole doxing and everything. That's another issue. But there has been some focus on you in the last few months since your identity was revealed. I want to ask about your own personal journey with health. Have you ever been fat or unhealthy? I know there are pictures of you, when you're a lot younger and you don't look like a bodybuilder. Look, I'm not criticizing you for that. I used to, be quite unhealthy. I've lost a bit of weight. So, we all go through our own things. But I just wondered, what's happened with you? How did you get involved in the kind of the bodybuilding movement? What piqued your interest in that? Can you just talk about maybe your childhood and how you've developed?
Yeah, of course. Well, so I was lucky enough to grow up in the countryside. I've always been a sportsman. I was a sportsman at school. Played a lot of football, rugby, athletics, that kind of stuff. I got heavily into martial arts when I was a teenager. Ended up being a sort of semi-pro kickboxer. Used to teach kickboxing as well. So I've always kept myself in good shape. I didn't ever consider it to be a political thing, when I was a teenager, when I was doing kickboxing or whatever. The funny thing about that picture of me actually is I was in good shape. I was in very different shape from the way that I am now. I was lean. When I fought as a kickboxer in the kind of few semi kind of pro fights that I had, I think I was 10.5 stone. I was 150 pounds, and at my heaviest recently I've been 220. I've been 16 stone. So that's a pretty big difference in terms of weight. But no, so I've had a few dissolute periods in my life, like when I was at university, when I perhaps didn't keep on top of my health and fitness because I was keeping on top of other things, like drinking. But I really got into this actually just before the pandemic. So I read a book called Bronze Age Mindset by this chap, Bronze Age Pervert, that I mentioned earlier in passing, and he talks a lot about the political value of fitness, about health, about the left as leftism as a kind of biological phenomenon. And so that really got me into I suppose the political aspects of health and fitness. But I was lifting weights then, but the raw egg nationalism thing in particular, then raw egg nationalism was a kind of was a hashtag that was going around on Twitter in 2019, 2020 that I got behind. Consuming large quantities of raw eggs as an alternative basically to steroids. It's like a natural steroid cycle because of the protein, but also because of the cholesterol. So there's a huge amount of cholesterol in eggs, and cholesterol is a precursor of the sex hormones, estrogen, also testosterone. So I got behind that, and that was really when my journey from just a totally anonymous poster, nobody, to a semi-influencer, whatever you want to call me now, began. And I produced a cookbook. That was really the beginning. I made a raw egg nationalism cookbook in the summer of 2020, and it's been crazy ever since. But yes, I've always been in good shape. I've always known that it's important to be in good shape, and I've also understood as well the importance between mental and physical health. The link between the two things. That's been something that I've been very, very aware of. And in my slightly more dissolute sort of university periods, then when I got back on the wagon, when I started exercising again, I noticed straight away, wow, I can't believe I ever gave this up. I can't believe I wasn't working out when I was doing all my supervision essays. I should have been working out. I'd have had a much better time doing them, etc. So I have a deep background in fitness, I would say, but the political stuff has definitely been much more recent It's only been more recently that I've really sort of been red-pilled about fitness, if you will, and understood the political implications of health and fitness, the political implications of ill health being so widespread today.
And I know that obviously you're very, very healthy, and your diet is, very protein heavy, and you're obviously a bodybuilder and everything like that. I understand that. Do you feel that in the totality of your life, maybe this is too much of a personal question, so forgive me, you don't have to answer it, but do you just feel like in your whole life that you're living the life that, Bronze Age mindset has taught you? Do you feel that, because there's been some criticism of you, as being maybe a hypocrite because you were living with your mum for a while. I know there was, you had your own reasons for that. I think you were waiting for a house or something. Maybe you can talk about that. But do you feel like in your current life as a kind of influencer, you're fulfilling that masculine energy that some people have been promoting?
I know this. I know this criticism well. There was it was a central part of the docs, actually, of the revelation of my identity, that I had been living with my mum at some point, and I was, when I left Oxford. I actually left Oxford a year early to help my mother care for my grandmother. So it was an intensely personal thing. It wasn't just because I wanted to go home and live in the basement and eat chicken tenders. It was actually a family thing. But yeah, I don't know. I never took it upon myself to be an influencer. I never took it upon myself to be to do anything other than really actually just to kind of channel the wisdom of the ancients. I never thought that I would assume any kind of prominent role within any kind of health movement or anything else like that. I was just posting on Twitter, and I made this cookbook and was writing essays and stuff, and it's all really, really blown up. And but I take it seriously. I do take the fact that people look to me for advice very, very seriously. And I have people send me messages actually on a daily basis, like, your advice has helped me transform my life. I can see why Jordan Peterson gets emotional. Actually, I can see why Jordan Peterson gets emotional. He's inclined that way, but also having people say, you have helped me. I was in a bad place. I was overweight. I was depressed, and you helped me. You gave me advice. You gave me support. It's an amazing thing. So I do take it very, very seriously. And I listen to some of the criticism, not all of it, but yeah, it's an important thing to me. It does matter to me. I do care about helping people. I do care. It's not, the advice that I give isn't just sort of esoteric for the sake of it. It's not focused on. I don't focus on the things that I focus on just for the sake of being controversial or anything like that. When I talk about changing your diet, consuming nutrient-dense animal foods, eating like your ancestors, that is purely from the standpoint of actually helping people fix their health.
Well, the reason I ask is it was just because you obviously are promoting such a personal thing for people, and I know that there's been some on the left who've criticised you, but I don't.
And the right.
I'm not saying I agree with them. But one last question I want to ask about. You mentioned kind of vaguely throughout the whole interview the historic context of attitudes towards masculinity and health and fitness. Can you talk about how the ancients, whether it was in Greece or Rome or wherever, viewed attitudes towards masculinity and fitness and health? And when you see those kind of sculptured, those statues of like these very like fit men, and compare that to the cover of Vogue with Lizzo on, maybe you can talk a bit about the kind of the history of that and how the ancients viewed fitness.
Yeah, of course. I think it's worthwhile to understand, first of all, that actually physical health is something that's largely been taken for granted, I think, throughout history. So I think it's only when you get to a point where a society is as unhealthy as it is today that physical health really becomes an issue in the way that it has. But even so, I mean, the ancient Greeks, they had a cult of the body, and there's that famous ancient wisdom, mens sana in corpore sano, healthy mind in a healthy body. I mean, they had a developed philosophy of mind and body, of the relationship between mind and body. The ancient Greeks had bodybuilding contests, and you only need to look at the statuary, the surviving artistic works from the Greco-Roman world to see that they obviously idealized beautiful bodies. They considered the development of a beautiful body to be one of the highest possible ideals, and in many respects, so did we until very recently. We certainly worshipped beauty. I mean, Hollywood worshipped beauty. Hollywood was, where you watched a Hollywood film to see the most beautiful people in the world, the most beautiful men, the most beautiful women. So, I mean, that's something that we've actually kind of diverged from, certainly from the kind of Greco-Roman conception. I mean, we had a long period, of course, the Christian Middle Ages, when Christianity ruled the roost, when there was a slightly more ambivalent, I think, attitude towards the body. I think that Christianity has obviously, when the central image of Christianity is God nailed to a cross, suffering God, there's been a deep kind of tradition of contempt for the body within Christianity, of mortification of the body. And then, of course, you had the Renaissance, when you had the rediscovery of classical learning. You had the promotion again of classical ideals, including classical sculpture and sort of classical physical ideals, classical ideals of beauty, representation of beauty in art. So actually, in a sense, by denigrating beauty in the way that we do, by denigrating physical development and the development of man's inborn capabilities, then we have kind of taken a turn from the broad sweep, I think, of Western history. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the ancient Greeks, right back, to the earliest sources, then it's very obvious that they valued physical fitness and physical cultivation in a way that's actually kind of recognizable, in the sense, they had gyms. The gymnasia were important institutions. They were places where men went to develop their bodies, but also to develop their virtues. So the ancient Greeks knew that actually a man who develops his physical capabilities is more likely to be a virtuous man than a man who doesn't. And there's also that great quotation from Thucydides, where he says something along the lines of, society that separates its leaders from its soldiers will have its decisions made by cowards and its wars fought by idiots. And, so there was a very, very deep conception, I think, of physical culture and physical development as not being something superfluous. This isn't something that's it's not a hobby that people should just do in their spare time if they want to. It's actually essential to social and political culture as well.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.